Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Connor Volpe. I'm going to be your host, your MC, and today we have an awesome topic. We're going to be getting into all things skills, where they're going, how to approach a skills strategy at your organization today. And a special thank you to all of you for joining, not just for taking the time to do this, but also, Stacia, I'm going to steal your branding. As a marketer, I'm kind of jealous of it. This is an unwebinar. In other words, the vast majority of the time we're going to spend today is not going to be on pre-planned slides or a talk track. It's going to be responding to questions that you all submitted in advance. So it's going to be kind of fun. And I also want to make sure that even though you submitted questions in advance, we're going to be monitoring the Q&A for your questions as these go along. So we'll be taking pauses and breaks to make sure we're weaving those in. So by all means, please, as we're going through something, if you have a question, if you have a follow-up, if you have a clarification, or just something entirely new, please drop it in the chat. We would love to be able to answer those live, as well as address as many of the questions we can that you submitted in advance. So that's our today's, like I said, unwebinar. Thank you, Stacia, for the branding. And also, please use the chat. If you run into any technical difficulties while in today's webinar, our team will be monitoring not just for Q&A for the session, but also if you, again, run into any problems, we are happy to help you behind the scenes. Now, I also would love to introduce today's experts, the stars of today's show. Stacia and Danny, would you mind taking a moment to introduce yourselves? Anybody who doesn't already know you?
Sure, we can do that. I'm Danny Johnson. I'm co-founder and principal analyst at RedThread Research. We've been in business for about 7 years, and we've spent quite a bit of time studying skills and all the things that go along with that. And this is the second unwebinar, as Stacia calls it, that we've done in this format, and we absolutely love it. Just answering questions and continuing the conversation about skills we think is really important and really fun.
Yep, and I'm Stacia Dar, and all the things that Danny just said, I say ditto to. And I just want to say thank you to everybody for coming today. We know that things are exceptionally busy right now, and the world's kind of crazy, and we appreciate you taking an hour of your time to be with us here, and hopefully we can give you just a tiny bit more clarity after our conversation today.
Awesome. And I think where we want to start today is with a little bit of interaction from everybody on the line. So we actually have a poll that I'm going to flash up now. Take a moment, think about it, but I think this is a great way to get a sense for where everybody stands on their own skills journey and how it's coming together for everybody on the line. And I don't know, Danny or Stacia, if you want to say a few words, because I think it is interesting. It'll be very interesting to see where everybody stands, but I'm sure this is a question that you all delve into all the time with the clients and people that you work with. Where do you typically see people fall on the spectrum? Would just love to hear more about what you've seen with a question like this.
Yeah, sure. I'll share, because I've been doing, I think I'm doing 3 skills workshops at the same time right now. And so I've been asking this question a lot. And what's interesting is when Danny and I started this work, we would see a lot of organizations in no strategy at all, or we're talking about it but not acting. And over the last, I'd say 12 to 18 months, we've seen a big spike up into we've started, but it's chaotic. And that is, I think, good, because it shows that we're seeing a lot more folks who are farther along the journey, but it also means that they're hitting some roadblocks and need some guidance and some support from others who have gone before them. The good news is there are many who have gone before them, and so hopefully we'll be able to channel some of that today.
Yeah, I think the other thing that we're seeing is many organizations that started in one part of the organization, like talent acquisition or learning or somewhere like that, and now they're trying to broaden it. So it's kind of restarting or rejumping their skills strategy, because what works in a small part of the organization isn't always necessarily scalable.
Makes total sense. Okay, it looks like most people have submitted their answers, so why don't we go ahead and take a look at the poll results. The good news is it looks like we've got a bit more of an advanced group. People have started or they're working towards it. So looks like we have folks who are going to be a little bit more familiar with the basics, which is great today. But it sounds like this is maybe a little atypical from what the two of you see with the clients that you work with.
I don't think so. I think sorry, go ahead, Stacia.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think there's more in a structured approach, but about the same, and we've started, but it's chaotic. Danny?
I was going to say the exact same thing.
Awesome. And as we mentioned, everybody, we want to get to your questions, but first, I do want to give us a chance to kind of talk through the elements of the skill strategy and the frameworks. I think it's important for everybody to understand how the two of you and how RedThread approach this. So by all means, please take it away to help everybody understand kind of the perspective that you two are coming from.
Yeah. Do you want to take it, Stacia, or do you want me to?
Why don't you take it?
All right, I'll do that. We've been talking about skills for about 7 years. We were talking about it in the beginning, like many organizations do at the beginning. Like you need to figure out skills, and they often sort of mirrored competency frameworks and those types of things in the beginning. As we talked to organizations and as we talked to the vendors that are serving these organizations, we found that there are basically 6 big elements of a strong skills strategy, and they are on this sheet. The middle one is the one that most organizations struggle with, believe it or not. And it's also one of the most important because it feeds into all of those other areas, and that's scope and purpose. Understanding why you're doing it and how big that effort is kind of key to making sure that you get your strategy right. Partnership and governance is the second one, figuring out who your partners are in the organization and who's in charge of making decisions. Culture is one that often gets left out. We see a lot of people putting the back end into place without changing the minds of the people on the front end. And in instances like that, sometimes those skill strategies fall flat. Architecture is a really interesting piece. It's the back end and making sure all of your skills data flows together and that you've got the right technology to make sure that that data works together. Data is the next one, and then wrapping up with technology. So architecture, data, and tech are sort of the back end things. Scope, purpose, partnership, and governance, and culture are sort of the front end.
Awesome. Stacia, anything to add, or should we get into our first question?
Let's get into our questions. That's what we're here for.
It is. Cool. So we want to start with one that's maybe a little provocative. And Stacia, you were actually, I don't think you necessarily intended to, but you were getting into this when you thanked everybody for being here, which I think is really important because it does feel like things are moving faster than they ever have before. And that's because they are. And so while things are advancing, while technology, people, process, culture are moving so quickly, maybe it's important to start with a question of, are skills still relevant given how fast and constant everything is changing?
Yeah, and I would say that they are more relevant than ever and only going to continue to be so. So I think we're in this moment right now where we're starting to see a shift in focus to tasks in particular. And the reason for that is twofold. One is because you're seeing generative AI come, and a lot of people are saying, well, what can the AI do that people can't, et cetera. And so we're seeing a focus on tasks really as the Rosetta Stone between people and AI. They're the one thing that they both do. The other reason that I think we're seeing kind of a questioning of this is that we as an industry like to run after the next bright, shiny object. And so when we see tasks, it's like, oh, wait, I don't have that. I have to do that now too. And so I think that some people are like, oh, well, skills passe. I would argue not, for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, when we are looking at job, let's say we decide that we need to automate some 30% of a job, or we can do that. We're going to then need to put in another 30% of tasks for somebody to do that AI can't do. But they don't necessarily know what those tasks are, or they don't know how to do them. And so we need to know the skills necessary to do the tasks. So we have to have that to train the people. So that's one thing. The second thing is that I think that we are going to continue to have less good signals, external signals of what makes somebody good. I was just reading an article this morning, a scientific article that was showing that the power of a really well-written cover letter before ChatGPT was very high as a signal. Is now not a signal at all. And so we're going to turn to things that we can point to and measure to understand if people should be able to do jobs. And that's only going to get more so, not less so. Sorry, Danny, I think I interrupted you.
I don't think you did. I think there was just an echo. I completely agree. This is one of the things that Stacia and I do agree on. Skills is becoming, for a minute there, it dipped and people are like, is it even worth it to put this into place? And yes, 100%, absolutely it is. And it's because of all the things that Stacia said, and because skills as a concept is just sort of breaking down the abilities of the individual into more granular pieces so that you can make better decisions about what's going on. There's a big conversation out there right now about the building block of work. Is it a job anymore, or is it a task, or is it a smaller piece of whatever? And until we understand the tasks that Stacia said and the skills that we have in the organization, it's hard to put all of those things together to build the organization the way that it needs to be built.
And shameless plug for your framework or the 6 elements of the strategy. I feel like we covered this when you mentioned, like, what is the purpose of why you're doing this in the first place? I think, Danny, that's exactly what you're getting at, is this is a way to hopefully better understand people and what they can do and how that maps to the work that will need to be done in the future as that changes. So if that's maybe why you're investing all this time and effort into a skills framework and a skills strategy, that is still very relevant today, maybe even perhaps more relevant than before, given how fast things are changing. But speaking of how fast things are changing, let's call a spade a spade. One of those things is AI. It is generative AI. It is agentic AI. And those are forcing, I think, everybody to perhaps rethink what work is like, what talent does, what humans do. So in that, are skills still the best way to think about the workforce, given how fast some of these external factors like these technologies are evolving?
I don't know how else you would think about it. It seems like we went from sort of like professions to careers to roles, and now we're sort of at skills. We've sort of gone down that. So when I'm thinking about a workforce moving forward and the way that work will need to be done in the future, I was on the phone with the CHRO this morning, and he was saying, yeah, in our organization, we're starting to think about how we organize the people around the work that needs to be done instead of the work around the people structure that exists in an organization. And so when we get down to a skill level and we understand the skills that people have, we can configure them in way different ways than we ever have before to get very specific pieces of work done. Whereas in the past, we've just been sending them through the assembly line that has been in place for the last 150 years. So I think it's more important than ever. And Stacia brought up this point earlier, this idea of understanding the tasks that you have to do and the skills that you have, and understanding the data that is needed in order to get that structured.
Stacia,
Yeah, the only thing I would add,
yeah.
The only thing I would add is that skills, there's a lot of data we have on people in an organization, and I would hate for people to think that we are advocating for only using skills data. There's just such a plethora of it, and so yes, we should be using skills, but there's organizations that have competencies and behaviors and other data that's what people are doing. All these things factor into what's happening with a person in their role and what they're doing. And so I think skills are, just reinforcing Danny's point, are as relevant as ever, but that there may be more as we go along that we can use to understand people and the jobs that they do.
Speaking of competencies, we did get a question in the chat before you were even mentioning it about the difference between skills and competencies. And since you brought it up, let's address it now. How should people think about the differences between those two? Because I think maybe oftentimes they're used a little bit interchangeably, and that's probably not entirely fair.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot. I play a lot in the L&D space. I think the difference is that competencies are sort of a mindset and a structure, and skills are data. The thing that we should be paying attention to with respect to skills are data. And so have we seen organizations use skills like competencies? Absolutely, we have. They're just as outdated, they're outdated within 3 months, just like competency models are. So holding on tightly to the idea of skills or how you picture skills to be is really different than listening, as Stacia was saying, to the signals that you have in the organization about what people can do and how they do it. So that's how I see the differences. One is an idea of, structured idea of how you want people to behave and what they can do. And the other one is the data that proves or indicates that they can do that thing.
Awesome. So
I'll just add that this has been such a perennial question that literally the first article Danny and I wrote on this was called Skills versus Competencies, what's the deal? And I'll tell you that what's the deal was not the first title of that report. So,
I mean, I think it's also telling, like at the beginning of Workplace Stories, it was actually started to talk about skills. A lot of the very first people that we interviewed, we asked this question to, what's the difference between skills and competencies? And most of them said, I don't care. What I want to know is what people can do. And so that kind of gets back to that idea, like, do I really need a framework to view all the things, or do I just need data that can help me make better decisions?
So speaking of, I think, like you talked about, a framework to make better decisions, we've talked a lot about being skills-based, right? Like that is, I think, a phrase that we use quite a lot. What do you see when you work with your customers, when you work with folks in the industry? What is the case to be made if someone says, I want to do a big skills-based transformation at my company? How do you see people justifying to leaders that, hey, we need to invest in this in order to get us where we need to go? What do you two see from companies who've done that well, perhaps?
So I'll start by saying, unlike most HR initiatives, this tends not to be something that HR needs to go to leaders to say, hey, do you think this is a good idea? Yeah, I need a skilled workforce, go figure it out. So this argument that we have to justify is not, I find that less the case for this particular topic than some other topics that we write about. So that being said, we actually did some research on this last year. And what we found was that organizations that had a clear skills strategy actually had better outcomes. So specifically, they were 3.4 times more likely to give a positive NPS score, eNPS score, 2 times more likely to report the company as innovative, and 1.7 times more likely to say that the company met its previous year's business goals. So it's kind of interesting because you can then say, well, like, why is that the case? Because not that many organizations have a good skills strategy, right? Or certainly when we collected the data, they didn't. And the reason for that was actually 3 things we learned through our follow-up conversations. And one is that just putting together a skills strategy can help foster alignment. So your question about, senior leaders, et cetera, right? If you have to if you're putting together a skills strategy, and if you use our framework, particularly around scope and purpose, you got to be clear on what you're trying to do. And that requires alignment, and that gets everybody on the same page. Second, it enables better decision-making, because that enables people to, because they have that alignment and you're having the conversations, you're asking more questions and you're getting to a better answer. And then third, because of the just sheer scale of the skills effort, it creates greater transparency around where we're going and what we're trying to do. And people ask fewer questions and you get people moving in the right direction. And that's all before you see the benefits of potentially being able to get people into the right roles and understand your skills gap, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the better question is, why wouldn't you focus on skills?
I really like what you said there about it essentially forces a conversation that maybe wouldn't have otherwise happened and starts to get some of that alignment. But Danny, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that one.
I think a lot of times when people think of we're going to become a skills-based organization, it's a gigantic tear up, right? And we think of the ontology or the taxonomy first, and we think of reorganizing every single role in the organization so that there are skills associated with it. That's what we think of in our HR minds. That's what we think of. The organizations that we've seen that do this really well do the scope and purpose, and they do understand partnerships and culture and architecture and data and tech. But they also sort of rally around use cases. Like, why are we doing this thing and what can we do with this right out of the gate, right? And so while different people might be doing different things in different parts of the organization with respect to skills, and the back ends definitely need to be aligned there, where we see the greatest success is when they go after something like, we are hiring the wrong kind of person. That means we don't understand the skills that need to go into that role. Or we are losing people because we're not able to move them around the organization. How do we solve that problem? And so in going directly after a problem while working on the back end is what I think a skills-based organization is. It doesn't necessarily have to do with structure, that sort of theoretical structure we talked about. It's all about how we start talking and thinking with respect to skills, right? And so when you think about culture, it's no longer about, all right, how do we promote somebody? It's now like, all right, what kinds of skills do you want to develop in your career? Like it's a whole sort of like mindset shift before it's anything else.
And I think to follow up there, the idea of a skills-based transformation can feel all-encompassing, can feel intimidating, can feel like you're trying to boil the ocean. So I think what you were getting at there, Danny, was, like you said, having specific almost steps or ways to get where you want to go. But to kind of dial that back maybe even a little bit, is that a place you'd recommend seeing people get started if they're feeling like, hey, this is too much? I don't know if I can get the buy-in.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can do all of this. It feels like boiling the ocean. Is there a common place or way you recommend people think about getting started? Like, how do you help coach people through going from like zero to one?
Yeah. In all of the conversations we've had with every single organization that is doing this, nobody has said, hey, yeah, we've got it figured out, follow our plan. Every single person has said, we're just dipping our feet, we're just getting started, we don't know what we're doing, we're just figuring this out as we go. The advice that we've given in all of everybody everywhere is you just have to start. You have to start somewhere. And that doesn't mean going out and buying the technology right off the bat or making sure that all of the roles have skills associated with them. It's starting where you are, right? So in L&D, for example, is my content tagged with skills that people learn in this? Are the job recs that we have out there tagged with skills? Are we starting to gather data on performance of particular skills that we know we need in the organization moving forward? Like these little tiny things where we're starting to gather data and build momentum is where we see a lot of success happening, because once you have some of that data, you can do a little thing with it, then you have a use case that you can take to somebody and say, all right, this is a bigger deal. We need to collaborate on this stuff. We need a technology that will help us harmonize the data or whatever it is. But until you start, it is literally like one of the biggest things that we see is people are just like, well, it's got to be perfect before we launch. And I will tell you now that it will never be perfect. You know, no matter how much planning goes into it, it's always going to be a mess. It's just the nature of what it is. It's messy. It's always going to be messy. And so getting comfortable with that mess and just starting where you are with just little things that start making you think or act in the way of the skills is what we tell people.
And then the other thing, which I know we've mentioned, but I just want to hit home again, is scope and purpose. What are we trying to do with this whole thing, right? Because without that, you might spend time, putting tags on skill or on for jobs that don't really matter as much as the things that align to your business strategy, et cetera. So scope and purpose, making sure that you're having the conversations with folks is so important. But like Danny said, just start.
Yeah. We talked to one, just an example of this, Connor, is we talked to a CLO who was systematically going through their roles and their tasks that their organization needed to do and weeding out anything that they thought was going to be done by AI in the next year. And so instead of like categorizing everything and planning skills for everything, they're saying, nope, these are going to be done by AI. We don't even need to address those in the skills planning that we're doing for our organization.
And that actually ties into a question that we did get in the chat. So another good jumping off point. I think something that folks are thinking about is as AI starts to become more and more involved in our work, as people start to get more and more augmented by AI tools, how do we think about a human in the loop, right? And maybe more specifically, are there skills that people might need to de-learn, or skills that maybe even become more important as we think about, well, if the nature of work is it's constantly evolving, if again, like it's more so human in the loop than humans that do everything, if we're moving in that direction, have you two started to see or have conversations about, it sounds like maybe perhaps with the company you just mentioned, Danny, about what kind of skills now become, again, more or even less important in a world that works that way?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting conversation, right? And Stacia and I have talked about this quite a bit, because what we're seeing is AI is sometimes taking first level jobs. So, mailroom type of jobs, people that come into the organization. In our organization, we use the example of cleaning data. Do we need to clean data anymore? Probably not. We can get an AI bot to clean our data. But there's tremendous value in knowing how to clean the data and cleaning the data to understand the database and understand what an anomaly looks like and all of that kind of stuff. And as that sort of goes away by some of these new jobs, it changes the nature of everything, right? The way we learn, the way we work, all of those types of things. And a lot of organizations are struggling with this. All right, how do we get AI to ride side saddle with people so that they are still developing those skills. Because what's happening is people are coming into the organization. They no longer need to do that work that we used to use for training. And we're now having to train them up so that they can meet the next level. And that's causing all kinds of weird things in organizations. Do we not hire those people? Do we no longer hire, people right out of school? How do we handle that? And so it's something that organizations are struggling with. I think the other big thing is we talk about big AI and little AI. Little AI is that little coach on the shoulder that, as you say, human in the loop. I don't really like that. I don't think a human should just be in the loop. I think that there are things that are innately human and that a human should always be doing. And I think there are things that can be repeatable and the AI should be taking on. So it's more dividing the jobs, giving the robots what the robots are good at and making sure that the humans are doing what the humans do. And the challenge that most organizations are facing right now is, what is the bridge between those two things?
Yeah, I would add a little bit here in terms of, we don't generally go into, what skills are good for the next 10 years or whatever, because it's a little bit of, it's anybody's guesswork. But I will say my guesswork is critical thinking and logic, right? So we have been in an organizational hierarchy by and large where one level does what the level above them told them to do. And in some ways the AI, where does the AI fit in that, right? So if I just do what my boss said to do, I just have to execute the thing, right? I don't have to question the thing, the outcome, the why this should be done or why that shouldn't be done. But we're going to have to question the bot. Did the bot run the analysis right? Did it do this? Did it do that? And we use AI for lots of things. But I'll tell you that even with tons of publicly available information out there, even with the things that we have fed into our own models, it gets it wrong. I was writing something yesterday and it referenced somebody's a Gen AI assistant, and it literally referenced their competitor's Gen AI assistant in reference to this company. And I was like, good thing I know better than that, because that would be a reputation killer. But the point being, you have to have the bigger logic, you have to have the critical thinking, you have to have a knowledge base in the areas to be able to question. And so that is something we're going to see, I think, have an increased importance. But that's, it's like when we taught people to read, when people weren't, could start to read the Bible. It opened a whole can of worms when we start questioning and asking questions of not just the bot, but those around us. So we think there's going to be bigger societal implications of that need for more critical thinking and questioning than what most folks are talking about.
I totally agree. And by the way, this could be an entirely separate webinar. I think we could probably go on for forever on this topic. But just a quick little example, as I think both of you were kind of getting at. How long ago was it when the role, not just the skill, but the role of a prompt engineer was all the rage? And I think we're getting to a point now where that's maybe more of a skill that probably all of us need to have to some degree. And it's maybe less of a really popular role. It's not to say there aren't going to be prompt engineers out there. That is still something that we will need, but that's probably more of just a democratized skill, as we've now figured out how and where people and these AI models or these agents or these bots do work together. So like I said, this could be a whole separate webinar, but that's not what we're here for. My next question for the two of you has to do with adoption. Now, this is something that even as Eightfold, as a solution provider, we work with our customers every day on getting them to adopt more of our product. But specifically for the two of you, how do you have tips, strategies for helping companies buy in to skills-based practices, to a skills-based strategy? Is there anything you've seen that is really useful, is particularly effective to helping them adopt more and more of these skills-based methodologies?
I have two. I'm sure Stacia has several as well. My first one is you got to change your language. You can't talk about the same work as you have and just layer skills on top of it, right? So performance reviews have to become about skills. Learning journeys have to become about skills. talent acquisition has to become about skills. We have to change our language around how we're addressing sort of development and performance in the organization. That has to be there. And measurement kind of goes along with that as well, right? We're no longer measuring, do we generally like you and do we think you're a good guy? Sure. But we're now measuring against actual skills that happen in the organization. And then the second thing is we've also seen people try and layer it in over something that already exists. And a lot of times skills at its core is just a different way of thinking, right? So we can't have a skills, or we've seen it, and going back to learning, we can't have a skills are super important in our organization, but we're still going to measure butts and seats, right? We're still going to measure like how much time people spent per year on sort of traditional development. It's a completely different way of thinking. And the leaders, particularly the people practices, need to change the way that they're thinking and communicating about it so that it infiltrates the entire organization.
I would add to that, we spend a lot of time talking about being very clear on the what's in it for me, or the WIFM, for the different populations that skills touches. And when we've done this in our webinars, in our workshops, the people have been really good at understanding what HR is going to get from as a benefit, or what the talent acquisition team is going to get. But when we say to them, well, what's the CIO going to get from this? What's the IT organization going to get? Or what is marketing going to get? And all of a sudden, people are like, oh, I'm not really sure. And then you say, okay, well, what's your average employee going to get? Well, they're going to get, development. Okay. To Danny's point, are you assessing them for that? Do they know what the connection is? Oh, well, maybe not really. So it's really about being crystal clear and taking yourself out of your HR seat and saying, what if I'm just an average employee? Why in the world would I do this? What is the benefit that I get? Or if I'm a business leader, why in the world would I want to look at this data? And making sure that you're crystal clear on why this is good for the whole organization, and not just broadly good, but like with a business case good, tied to numbers that people care about.
Again, it sounds like a good strategy is just keep asking yourself questions, right? Like once you answer one question, that probably leads to 1, 2, 3, 4 more. And to your point, like asking the right questions about how the rest of the business is going to use this, or maybe more specifically, what they're going to get out of it. I think there's a case to be made that even just having skills available provides great visibility to employees about how they might advance their career or what it might take. But to your point, that leads to follow-on questions and follow-on, are they being assessed by skill? How are we tracking those skills? All of those things then lead to more and more questions.
And I think too, though, it's interesting to think about how those data are going to be used. So I'll use myself as an example. When Danny and I were at Deloitte, they had an internal system with a profile, and you were supposed to share your skills and your knowledge and all the rest of that. And we came in through, or at least I came in through the Burson acquisition. And so when that happened, and they're like, oh, you should fill this skills profile thing out. I was like, oh no, I am not doing that. Like, not in 100 years am I doing that. And the reason for that, I hope none of my former Deloitte colleagues are listening, but the reason for that was that I was going to get pulled onto projects that I didn't have the bandwidth for. As a new acquisition, I was going to get asked to do things when I was already so overwhelmed and overloaded in the organization that I actively didn't want people to reach out to me. And so that is just one reason why somebody might not want that. But there might be other people who are like, I don't know about all this rah-rah, got to go up and keep on like doing more. Maybe I'm totally happy in my role. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like if you're doing your job well and you're continuing to develop or do whatever you have to do that, that's okay. So I think it's so important to think about the motivations. Don't just assume, particularly with this, folks just now entering the workforce who have a different foundational experience of what work is post 2020. Don't just assume they want the same things that you wanted, because that may not be the case, and that can significantly impact adoption.
And I think both of you touched on this a little bit, but I'll ask a more pointed question. Do you think we're moving in the direction of seeing skill-based career growth? Like instead of getting promoted perhaps based on a role, do you think that there is a path now that some organizations are tinkering with or adopting or thinking about that in order for you to grow, it's maybe more of a language of skills than roles? Have you seen something like that start to happen in the market?
Yeah, about 5 years ago, Stacia and I were talking about it with respect to reputation, right? So reputation and work as the reward. So instead of a promotion, you got to do the interesting things because you had certain skills or had proven yourself in the organization. So that's what we were talking about 5 years ago with skills. I think that's absolutely true, especially as we're seeing sort of the unit of work changing and organizations sort of changing to put the people around the work instead of the work around the people. And I also think that I just lost my train of thought. But yeah, those we're definitely seeing that for sure.
I think where people are falling down on it is the making it happen. Sorry, I also currently can't speak today. Operationalizing it. That is the word I was trying to get out there. What we're seeing is right now, the way that we budget is in jobs. The way that we, career hierarchies are built is in jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And so, if people are going to move in that direction, like Danny said, we've seen it, and we've seen a lot of energy around it, but it takes a thoughtful restructure of how work actually is organized and done. And importantly, the technology that enables you to do it. The number of times I've talked to folks who are like, this is what we want, but X HCM won't let me do it. And because that HCM connects to my ERP, I can't pay these people. I can't do all the other things I need to do. So it is a system change when you're talking about it at that level. Broadly, we're not there yet, but we sure see a ton of energy around it, particularly right now as people are thinking about, we're seeing a lot of focus on job architectures and what those look like. And they're breaking down the jobs themselves into these skills and tasks and such. And so they're laying the foundation to be able to do that in the future, even though it may not be widely adopted yet today.
Yeah, and if you're looking for some industries that have sort of been down this path of ways, consulting firms is one. Media and creative firms is another. Law firms is another. Tech firms are another. So they're already starting to say, okay, this project has come in. We're doing this piece of work, and we're going to bring in the best people that have these skills for it. It does. I was talking to the CHRO this morning. He's like, it's a really interesting concept, but what if that extends more broadly? So somebody's coming into the organization, and we're pulling somebody from HR and somebody from IT and somebody from whatever. It makes me wonder what will happen to specializations, right? So do we need an instructional designer, or do we need someone that can think strategically about learning? Do we need an IT person that can handle the back end, or do we need somebody that it's an interesting sort of way of thinking about it, but we still see large organizations trying to do this a little bit better than we've done it, the more traditional and very static way we've done it in the past.
Yeah, we're starting to see some of our customers go in that way of skills-based work, where how can I find people to do the work based on their skills, not necessarily like who they know or what their role is, but do you have the skills required for the work that needs to be done? Yeah. So it's kind of exciting to see it because it leads to a more flexible model, but then also hopefully people get to work on things that not only they're good at, but maybe they actually want to work on. So you get a little bit of both, which is kind of the goal, I think.
It also opens up talent pools. So organizations have dipped into contract work and gig work and consultants and things like that, but it really opens that up. I need an expert in this thing. Let's bring that person onto the team.
So there's a word, or rather a phrase, that we haven't used yet, which is skills taxonomy. Speaking of something that maybe sometimes can feel a little overwhelming, perhaps. How do you two see companies that are doing a good job of this? How are they developing their skills taxonomy? What are they doing to maintain it, not just create it and let it lie fallow, but then also have it be relevant once you've put all that work into potentially building it? What have you seen? How have companies that have done this well done it well?
Stacia's actually in the middle of a skills architecture paper, so we're going to let her take that one.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a few things. You mentioned a taxonomy. And so just to be clear for folks who are on the line, a taxonomy is basically like how you organize things, and every single thing has its place within the relevant category. So think like genus, species, etc. That is like how we had traditionally thought about competencies, skills, etc. But what the technology is enabling us to do now is to do more of an ontology, which is where you can see groups of skills that fit together, but it's but some skill that's in that group could also be in another group. Now, why I mentioned this in the context of your question about taxonomies is that a lot of organizations' ontologies are enabling them, so the groups of skills, as opposed to the columns, if you will, is enabling them to have a better sense of how skills are changing. And then because they've got technology that connects the taxonomy to the ontology, they're able to pull it through and connect it and keep those taxonomies much more up to date. This is one of the things that when people say, well, how are skills not just like competency models for the last 20 years? It's like, well, actually, we have technology that can kind of see where skills are evolving toward or from, and then to translate that over into the taxonomy that the organization is using. So it can just be far more dynamic than it ever was before. So I think your question, though, Connor, was how are people doing this well? Is that
exactly?
Yeah. So I think, one is use the tech, right? Danny and I on Workplace Stories, our podcast, have interviewed some people who have not used the tech, and you can almost see them praying, like, please don't do what I did, don't do it, because it's so difficult. But it's not just that it's difficult, but that it gets out of date so quickly if you're doing that. So I think, the things I would recommend are, one, make sure that whether you're using ontology to keep it up to the taxonomy up to date or you're using some other technology to do that, make sure it's up to date, first and foremost. Second, don't build it on your own, right? Like the 80% of the skills are the same the world over. 20%, I'm sure, are, fit your special organization and your own needs. And that's fine. But the 80%, don't build it. Work with somebody who can help you get there. There's all sorts of taxonomies out there that you can customize to your organization. So some may fit a little bit better than others, but make sure that you get the one that's right for you and involve your leaders in doing that. I was just actually on the workshop I just came from, somebody was talking about how they were using one of the big HCM vendors' skills taxonomy, and they said, look, it just didn't work for us. It's not that it's bad, it just wasn't working. So we ended up going with somebody else, and then we kind of backed that into the system of record. So I think the other part of this is these organizations are not afraid to be like, that didn't work. That was a neat experiment. Didn't work. We're going to do something else.
Also seeing, the conversation between ontology and taxonomy is like an ongoing conversation, right? Like which one's better? It really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So some of those skills and those roles that don't change over time or that need certifications or things like that, sometimes the taxonomy does work better because you're outlining everything and it's contained and you know exactly what it is. In most organizations that are trying to get a very broad view of what their organizations are doing, taxonomies tend to be a little bit inflexible and ontologies seem to be a little bit more flexible. So it really does depend on how big your scope is and what exactly it is that you're trying to accomplish. But pay attention to the way that your vendors talk about this as well, because a lot of times they'll try and force on a taxonomy that has every skill in the known universe that still doesn't fit your needs. You need something more flexible.
We got quite a few questions in advance on this topic, and actually including a couple in the chat about capturing skills, validating skills, assessing skills. I know there's a lot of meat on that bone, but one of the specific examples was if I'm assessing someone's skill, maybe I have a different rating for them than you might, Stacia, or you might, Danny, and it kind of leads to all kinds of questions of, well, if I think they're 5 out of 5, but you think they're a 3 out of 5, how do we kind of rectify all this? So I think it kind of comes back to the idea of capturing skills data and then again validating that data. So I don't just say I have X or Y skill that I can speak Portuguese, that somehow somewhere you have the confidence that I can or I can't and I cannot, but I could say it and then maybe that gets pulled in or maybe it doesn't. So can you talk a bit about the actual skills data and again like how you might capture it and validate it, or how people should think about doing that?
Yeah. So when we talk about skills data, we're basically talking about signals, right? Data signals that tell me whether or not somebody has a skill. And in the last 3 or 4 years, there's been a big conversation about this idea of validation. Is a self-assessment somebody telling me that they have a skill as valid as a manager telling me that that person has a skill? I don't know. Could be, couldn't be. Like there are many sort of things that go into sort of making that judgment call. But what we have sort of cataloged, we wrote a paper called Skills Verification, and it outlines 7 types of skills verification. There's self-verification, there's self-assessment, there's formal assessment, there's a manager looking over your shoulder, there's external benchmarking, like CPA exams and things like that. There's work data that we can send streams to your skills tech to tell me, you know, how many times you're failing on a machine. And then there's also HRS data or people data that tells me. And so we see each of those as sort of a signal. And then within each of those, we have cataloged, well, not within each, but overall, we've cataloged about 37 different ways or 37 different signals that you can use to verify skills. So the question isn't, you know, and it was really interesting. We just ended up working with an organization that was trying to figure out the skills verification. And they're like, we want the most valid data in every single circumstance. We're like, no, you don't. This is a gigantic job. It's super expensive. There's no way you can do it. We're not doing that. So instead, it comes down to which skills do we actually need to verify? Which ones do we know are going to pertain to the outcomes that we want in the organization? And then what kind of signals do we need in order to make the decision that we're trying to make? So self-assessment, for example, may not be the most valid, but it can give me a sense for what people think they have and where I might need to invest L&D dollars to build skills. Whereas if you're trying to move somebody from one role to another or bring somebody into the organization with the right skills, a different level of validation might be necessary for that person. And so it really is it's a patchwork of ideas and a lot of decisions that need to be made. It's not just like, yeah, he rated me as a 4, she rated me as a 3, therefore we're going to average them out and blah. Which is also a problem. That idea of harmonization between systems is also a problem. But verification is a much bigger discussion, and understanding exactly what you're going to use that data for, and then looking at the right skills, what was I calling them? Signal. Looking at the right skills signal to get that information is where people should be pointing their attention.
Yeah, I would just second what Danny said. Don't have anything to add there. No.
No. I think kind of said it all. I mean, it sounds like you have to kind of figure out a framework that works for you. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck, to overuse the phrase, boiling the ocean, and nobody wants that.
Yeah, I think it kind of falls into the same category as some of the other things that we do with skills. We want to just solve skills. We want to solve verification, and that's not the thing. Like what you want to do is figure out what you're trying to do, figure out the decision you're trying to make, figure out if you have that data, or figure out how you get that data and then make the decision. And it's the same process for every single sort of decision you're making. Do I have that data? Hopefully I do. Then I can use that to make this decision. Or do I need to go get that data, and how do I do it?
So I imagine you two probably see this somewhat frequently, where there's companies who put together a skill strategy, a skills framework, but maybe have trouble actually putting it into practice and reaping the benefits of all of that work. What do you see from companies who are able to then see the value, right? To finally reach the top of the mountain and say, hey, at least we've gotten our first wave of results in here. We're starting to see some of that value. Ideally, measurable business outcomes, right? Like the golden ticket for all of this. What do you see those companies doing? Is there an example that you can share of a company that has done this so people know, like, well, maybe I could get there if I do all of this, then I can get to that point? Would just love to hear more about some companies who have done this and done this well.
You're on mute, Stacia.
Sorry, I was trying to handle echoes. Do you want to talk a little bit about Ericsson and what they've done?
I mean, we can. So we've had Ericsson on our Workplace Stories podcast twice because the way that they handle skills is both pragmatic and aspirational, if that's maybe a good way to put it. Vijay Krishnan, the CLO at Ericsson, 6 or 7 years ago said, you know what, AI is coming and we need everybody in our organization to understand on some level AI. And that was the skill that they tackled for that year, is everybody is going to have some sort of idea of AI. And so they took a really pragmatic way of looking at it. And so every year they sort of reevaluate, all right, what are the skills that are going to take us, that are going to align with the business and that we need to go after? That's what we're going to focus on. And we're going to build everything around that. They've also done something really interesting in that they have deputized people within the organization and made them sort of like skills leaders. Within job families or within roles, they're like, okay, it's your job to determine what skills are needed and your job to tell us what those skills are, and so that we can make sure that everything is happening the way. And they've made it sort of like you're special if you have this job, right? Like it's an honored position, so to speak. And so the way that they have they've gone in with a scalpel pretty much and said, these are the things that we're going to focus on. And yet we also want this body of information in the organization that we will eventually use. Is a really interesting way to do it, right? They're using the data to make some of those bigger decisions, but then they're also saying just the body of data that we need in the organization to make sure that good decisions are being made is the level down.
Yeah. I think that's probably the best example of an organization that is super relatable, if you will, in that they kind of started, where most others have started and then have done something remarkable. Probably the least relatable but most aspirational or inspirational example is what EPAM Systems does, with Sandra Laughlin. And basically EPAM has been doing skills in one form or another for 30 years. And they build their own technology, so they've been able to make all the tech talk to each other, which most companies are not going to do. But if you want to be able to see kind of the value of an integrated skills system, I would look to them. Sandra's written a lot about it, but I think the things that they say specifically is, one, they're able to move the people to the work, not the work to the people, because they actually know what people's skills are. They assess skills on an annual basis so that they can clearly make sure that the data are up to date and that they can assign people to things. Promotions and such are based in large part on skills and your ability to continue to develop them. And they use skills at the beginning of the process. So from when somebody first applies to an organization all the way through their tenure. And so it is literally how they run the business. And when we were talking to Sandra, she was also on our podcast. She said, we can't imagine not. It's not even a question. This is how we make decisions in our business about people. And so it takes a long time to get to that, but it is possible to do that. And so even though it may feel a little bit like, wow, that's really out there, if you can begin to integrate those data, if you can get it into your talent system, it is possible.
Yeah, and I think that speaks a lot to their culture as well. From the very beginning, it was skills in their culture. People know exactly what the expectations are for their skills levels and what kinds of skills they need to either maintain their job or move to another job. Nothing is a surprise because they have all this data and they talk in terms of skills.
Awesome. So I think we want to get into a bit of some of the barriers that folks are actually facing when it comes to their skills strategy. And we actually, for all of you, have a poll. So we'd love to hear where you are on this spectrum to see where you're running into roadblocks and trouble. But I wonder if, Danny and Stacia, if there's any association with this with almost like a maturity. So like if you've maybe just getting started, you run into one set of problems versus maybe you're a little bit further down the line and another problem pops up. Is there any truth to that? Or is it really just like you can run into any one of these at any one time? It just depends on your luck.
Yeah, I think Stacia's probably having this experience as well. We've run the skills workshop. I think we're on our 4th time. And every single organization that has gone through, we have asked, what's your biggest challenge with respect to developing a skill strategy? And every single one of them have said defining the scope and purpose. So even those that are far down the road are still struggling with defining why we're doing this and where are we what box are we drawing around it, which I think kind of aligns with B, probably, and maybe a little bit with E.
Yeah,
but other than that, say again, Stacia?
I just said I agree.
Yeah. But other than that, like we see different organizations with different things. Some of them have their tech together and some don't. Some don't know how to integrate their data. Some do.
I'm sure there is some just luck of the draw based on, to your point, the style of organization you come from, what has been done before you, right? The foundations you're building on. So some of it is just, well, this is what I've got. But let's go ahead and see some of our results. It looks like we've gotten most people to be in here. And we've got a decent spread at the top. Looks like data and buy-in. We talked about adoption. We talked about how to collect and validate and assess some of this. But then, of course, technology is in there as well. And we have a few for strategy. So it looks like we have a decent spread, but a concentration in data and buy-in. I know we only have a couple minutes left. So what I love to do before we end is just, Stacia and Danny, this has been great for the last hour, but I'm sure, is there something you'd want to share with the audience about, like, essentially a takeaway, an action item based on everything we've talked about today? If you could try to summarize, it's a hard task.
Sure.
But
No,
one action item for everybody they can take away. Would love to hear what you have to say for everyone.
I think maybe less an action item and more maybe an observation. I think it's not going to be very long before we're going to stop talking about skills. It's going to be in the water. We don't necessarily talk about an internet strategy anymore. It just is in the water. And I think we're moving that way with skills. And I will consider it a win when we get there. It's no longer something that we're not trying to be a skills-based organization. We're using skills data to the best ability we can to make better decisions in our organization.
My addition would just be going back to scope and purpose. If whatever you're doing, even if you're a few years into your skills journey, make sure you're crystal clear on the scope and purpose. In our workshop, we encourage people to develop a tagline so that when somebody says, well, why are we doing skills anyway? We are doing skills to blah, 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 and be very specific about it and tied back to what the business is trying to achieve. We have certainly observed that scope and purpose shifts over time, and it should, particularly if you have a really successful pilot and then you're trying to expand it. That scope and purpose absolutely will expand. But no matter how many times it's changed, at any one point, it should be clear.
That is all the time we have for today. So again, thank you, Danny and Stacia, for doing this. This is awesome. It's my first unwebinar, and I have to say, I really enjoyed it. So I hope everybody on the line did as well. And seriously, thank you to everybody on the line for joining. Again, an hour out of anybody's day is a lot to ask, so we really appreciate you spending it here with us. If you missed any of today's webinar, or if there's someone you'd like to share it with, you can do that through the link you used to join, and we'll also be posting this obviously on the Eightfold website as well to go find. But again, just thank you to everybody for being here. We really appreciate it, and we hope you have a great rest of your day, rest of your week. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.